Good morning, folks. It is the morning of October the 22nd, 2021, and we're going to embark on one of my favorite topics, all the things that annoy me. And believe me, there's a lot of them. But I wrote the following last night, hoping to offend as many people as possible. My most frequently recited mantra is that there cannot be a political solution to the West's postmodern identity dilemma. We have not only forgotten who we are, but also what a victim actually is, as opposed to this current cult of faux victimhood. I find the whining, postmodern critical theorists as repugnant as I do the alt-right simpletons who cannot construct a sentence correctly in the English language. The reason they annoy me so badly is that they continue to play whack-a-mole with every insane leftist policy without ever looking to the root cause of the policies that the left engages in. This is a great problem because the left will create an infinite number of problems, but they have one thing in common. They're all rooted in the same ideology. These people are completely ideologically possessed. And what they think, the thoughts they think, are mind pathogens that are corrupting civil society. In particular, I'm fed up with a particular subset among the alt-right who appear to have a sad lack of scriptural knowledge, yet somehow believe that they have God all wrapped up in a box. I'm constantly reminded of the old adage, I believe it's a Methodist adage, the more religion that you see in the shopkeeper's window, the less you know is inside the shopkeeper. So let's look to the root cause for the infinite number of insane things that the postmodern left can throw at us. As an example, I've used Amherst College in New England's East Coast, and their course description for Marx and critical theory. It was taught by Professor Kultunsky. All the links are going to be below. So anyone that tells you that critical theory, Marxist critical theory, isn't a real thing, you can show them these college courses and what they actually state about critical theory. And then you'll see why our government is embarking on the policies it is. I want you to measure everything our government does, every idiotic program and policy they initiate using our parliaments and to literally deconstruct society. Here's why. Description of this course on Cultural Marxist Critical Theory. A critical theory has a distinctive aim: to unmask the ideology falsely justifying some form of social or economic oppression, to reveal it as ideology, and in doing so to contribute to the task of ending that oppression. And so a critical theory aims to provide a kind of enlightenment about social and economic life that is itself emancipatory. So these people are foisting communism as an emancipation. Not the murderous ideology that murdered millions in the 20th century wherever it was tried, but an emancipation. Persons come to recognize the oppression they are suffering as oppression and thereby partly freed from it. So this is where the victimhood comes in, the faux victimhood that I just mentioned. Marx's critique of capitalist economic relations is arguably just this kind of critical theory. As participants in a capitalist market economy, we fall into thinking of the economy in terms of private property rights, free exchange, the laws of supply and demand, etc. And in doing so, we fall into thinking capitalist economic relations as justified, as how things should be. So there you go. The second thing they're attacking here, after making sure people feel themselves as victims, is your assets. I'm here to tell you, folks, that it doesn't take a great historian to understand that the right to own private property is one of the most liberating things that ever happened in the Western world. Marx argues that this way of thinking is nothing but ideology. It obscures even from those persons who suffer them the pervasive and destructive forms of alienation, powerlessness, and exploitation that, in Marx's view, define capitalist economic relations. Any prospect for change, reform, or for Marx revolution requires first that people come to see capitalism for what it is. For they must first see it in the ways in which they themselves are alienated, powerless, and exploited before they can try to free themselves from it. Later social theorists in what came to be called the Frankfurt School, remember that name, the Frankfurt School, Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, and Habermas, developed and refined the Marxian project of providing a critical theory of capitalist economic and social relations. So here you get to the social relations. The chief aim of our modern, postmodern government is to reconstruct society in their Marxian image. Social engineering is their prime goal, which is why we suffer at present in the sort of immigration policies that are working neither for the immigrants or the indigenous people of this nation. In particular, they argue that the forms of oppression distinctive of late capitalism are importantly different than the forms Marx found in the early capitalism of the Industrial Revolution. And so a critical theory about them must be different. Readings will be made up mostly somewhat difficult but very rich primary sources with some secondary readings to aid in the task of understanding interpretation. Prerequisite: one course in philosophy or consent of the instructor, limited to 25 students spring semester, visiting Professor Koltonsky. So you can see that we're funding universities to foist the idea that our culture, that Western society, based on the autonomous individual responsible to help steer the ship of state, and the right to private property are all forms of oppression. That's why, of course, the government is now talking about the Great Reset. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Folks, we have tried Marxism hundreds of times. You cannot cite any country that has developed a radical socialist ideology that forms the mojo of its government that has not become completely murderous and oppressive and authoritarian. These are things to think about and pray about. As you know, you Christians are the ones that have disappointed me the most, because you people are doing almost nothing to ensure that we live in a civil society where the gospel can be freely preached. As we're seeing now this past week, our pastors being jailed by our government. In spite of the fact that we have a constitution that's supposed to protect their right to speak freely in the name of Christ. If these things don't bother you and worry you, then I strongly doubt if you are indeed a Christian at all. You know what I'm talking about. I hope I've given you food for prayer and thought. You take good care. God bless those of you who are not lukewarm and sitting on the fence.